Imagine like waiting until your car's engine literally bursts into flames on the highway before you finally decide to, get an oil change.
I mean, that sounds completely absurd.
Right. It's ridiculous. But according to the stack of sources we're diving into today, that is exactly how millions of us treat our own minds. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at some fascinating notes that honestly fundamentally challenge our baseline understanding of mental health care.
It really does force you to take a hard look in the mirror. It brings up this massive blind spot in how society approaches daily well-being. Basically treat the mind as something you only tend to when it is completely shattered.
Exactly. So, our mission today for you, the listener, is twofold. First, we're going to completely deconstruct this pervasive myth that you must be in an absolute red alert crisis to seek out professional help.
Right, because that's a huge barrier for so many people.
It really is. But we aren't just going to sit here and, talk theory. For the second half of our mission, we're going to examine a real-world blueprint.
The practical application.
Yeah, we have the operational details of a telehealth practice in Georgia called Coping and Healing Counseling, and we're going to use their model to see exactly how the industry is trying to remove the barriers to everyday mental maintenance.
Which is, honestly, the necessary next step. Because before we can evaluate how an operation like that actually works, we have to unpack the psychological blockades that keep people away from that kind of care in the first place.
So true.
Like, you can build the best clinic in the world, but if people don't think they deserve to walk through the front doors, it just doesn't matter.
And that sets up the core argument presented in our sources today, the big lie, really. The myth is simply this: therapy is only for people with serious problems.
Oof, that one sentence does so much damage.
Right.
It implies this strict threshold. It says that your personal suffering must reach, like, a certain catastrophic altitude before society grants you permission to seek out a professional.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the sources give us two brilliant analogies to highlight how flawed that logic really is.
I love these analogies.
Yeah, they point out that believing you need a massive life crisis to go to therapy is exactly like saying the gym is only for Olympic athletes. Or, that cooking in a kitchen is only for Michelin-starred chefs.
Just think about the cognitive dissonance there. I mean, if you were driving down the street and you see someone jogging or pulling into a gym parking lot, you don't roll down your window and ask them what terrible, life-threatening physical disease they're currently fighting.
Right, you just assume they're taking care of their health. They're doing preventative maintenance.
Exactly. They are engaged in conditioning, they are building strength, improving cardiovascular endurance, or simply maintaining their baseline so that when a physical challenge inevitably pops up, their body's actually prepared to handle it.
Makes sense.
But with the brain, we've historically treated mental health strictly as emergency medicine. We completely ignore the value of routine mental conditioning and skill building. Treating the mind only when it's actively breaking down is just a profoundly limiting way to navigate life.
But let me play devil's advocate here for a second, or at least point out the friction. If we so readily accept that going to the gym, eating leafy greens, getting 8 hours of sleep, if we accept that's how we prevent a physical health crisis, why are we so incredibly stubborn about applying that exact same logic to our minds?
Well, it's a cultural issue.
Isn't part of the problem that society actively rewards us for ignoring our mental health? Like, if I white-knuckle my way through a stressful project, I get a promotion. Society practically incentivizes us to burn the candle at both ends.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That is the insidious part of hustle culture. We wear our exhaustion as a badge of honor. But beyond societal incentives, it fundamentally comes down to visibility and cultural stigma.
Visibility meaning you can't see a panic attack the way you can see a broken leg.
Right. A physical illness is often visible, or at least measurable by a blood test or an MRI. It commands immediate, unquestioned validation from your family and your boss. But mental distress, especially in those early creeping stages, is entirely invisible. And because it's invisible, there is this internalized guilt that just takes over.
The classic, other people have it worse mentality.
Yes. People tell themselves, I have a roof over my head, I have a job, I shouldn't complain, I'm not in a crisis, so I don't deserve to take up a therapist's time.
Wow.
So they just white-knuckle their way through another week, another month, another year. They survive, absolutely.
Yeah.
But they don't thrive. They completely miss the opportunity to build the emotional muscles required to handle the everyday friction of life without it costing them their inner peace.
So we have these highly functional people who are internally drained, but recognizing that deficit is really only half the battle. If therapy isn't just for the person in the middle of a massive breakdown, we have to ask, who is the everyday person going to this mental gym?
Which is a great question.
And the sources actually give us three highly specific, painfully relatable profiles of people who are technically fine, but who desperately need this maintenance.
The three faces of fine. Looking closely at these profiles tells us exactly what modern suffering actually looks like.
Okay, let's look at profile number one. The parent who deeply loves their kids but just keeps losing patience.
That is a quiet, daily struggle that carries just an immense amount of guilt.
It really does. And then profile number two. The person who appears totally fine to everyone around them but realizes they haven't felt actual genuine joy in months.
Just numb.
Yeah, numb. And then profile number three, which really stood out to me. The professional who is absolutely crushing it at work but is completely falling apart the second they get home.
When you lay those three profiles out side by side, the common thread is undeniable. None of these people are in an emergency room. None of them are failing at the raw mechanics of survival.
Right, they're paying the bills.
Exactly. They are highly functional human beings. They're paying their mortgages, packing school lunches, hitting their quarterly metrics, but they are experiencing a massive, silent internal deficit.
It's functional exhaustion.
And that deficit, whether it's a lack of joy, a lack of patience, or a lack of emotional bandwidth, erodes the quality of their life just as severely over a long timeline as a visible crisis would in the short term. The cost of their survival is their internal equilibrium.
I really want to zoom in on that third profile for a minute. The professional who is crushing it at work but falling apart at home. I call this compartmentalized suffering.
That's a good term for it.
How does that actually work mechanically in the brain? Like, how can someone simultaneously be a massive success, leading huge meetings, putting out complex fires in one environment, and then walk through their own front door and just completely unravel over a minor inconvenience?
Well, it comes down to how we allocate our psychological energy, specifically our executive function. Work environments, by design, often provide highly structured expectations.
Right.
There are clear rules of engagement, immediate metrics for success, and professional boundaries. So for someone who is highly functional but internally depleted, they can gather up all of their available emotional regulation and pour it into maintaining that professional mask.
Because the consequences of dropping the mask at work are immediate and severe. Like, you lose your job.
Exactly. But emotional energy is a finite resource. It is not a bottomless well. By the time that professional clocks out and returns home to their family, which is ironically the exact environment where emotional nuance, vulnerability, and deep connection are needed the most, their tank is completely empty.
Oh, wow.
The corporate structure is gone, the mask falls off, they have absolutely nothing left to give their spouse or their kids. And that specific friction, that stark, painful contrast between the work self and the home self, is a flashing neon sign that it is time to seek support. You don't need to wait until your marriage falls apart or you get fired to go to therapy.
You just need to be human, which is a direct quote from the source material, and I think it anchors this entire discussion. You don't need to be in crisis to get support. You just need to be human.
It entirely reframes the conversation from one of pathology to one of human maintenance.
But reframing the conversation doesn't really solve the math of a modern schedule. We've established that the everyday human needs therapy, but logic demands a logistical solution.
Right. The how.
If you are that exhausted parent who is already losing patience because you have absolutely zero free time, finding 3 free hours on a Tuesday for a commute and a session feels literally impossible. How does the industry actually solve the operational barriers for these people?
That is where the therapeutic theory hits the brick wall of modern reality. The geographical and temporal barriers are massive.
Which is why the operational details of coping and healing counseling, or CHC, provided in our sources are so fascinating. We are shifting from the why to the how.
Yeah, let's look at the model.
CHC is a telehealth therapy practice founded by Elias Joseph, who is a licensed clinical social worker, or LCSW.
And the structural design of CHC is very clearly engineered to address the specific profiles we just discussed.
Here's where it gets really interesting. They serve all 159 counties in the state of Georgia, all 159. And they do it through a 100% telehealth high-pay compliant model.
The mechanical advantage of that structure cannot be overstated. I mean, let's look at the logistics of traditional in-person therapy. You aren't just committing to a 50-minute clinical hour.
No, not at all.
If you live in a sprawling, geographically diverse state like Georgia, you have to factor in the reality of the commute. If you're in the metro Atlanta area, you are battling gridlock. If you are in a rural county in southern Georgia, you might be driving 45 miles just to find a licensed specialist.
So your 50-minute session suddenly bloats into a 2 or 3 hour block of time.
Exactly. And for the overwhelmed parent who is already stretched to the breaking point, or the professional who is tapped out, losing 3 hours in the middle of a weekday is a complete non-starter.
They just won't do it.
It's not that they don't want help. It's that the system's friction is too high. By utilizing a 100% telehealth model that spans every single county in the state, CHC completely eliminates that geographical and temporal friction.
But let me pause you there and voice what I suspect a lot of our listeners might be thinking. Telehealth sounds amazing on paper, zero commute. But if I'm that overwhelmed parent, my house is chaotic.
Sure.
I might be thinking, where do I even go to take this highly sensitive, emotional video call? The living room where my kids are watching TV. Doesn't the telehealth model create its own set of environmental barriers?
That is a very real practical concern. But the beauty of the telehealth model is its ultimate flexibility. The barrier of a noisy house is still lower than the barrier of a 3-hour commute.
That's a good point.
What you see in practice with 100% telehealth is people adapting the care to fit their lives. People take sessions in their parked car during a lunch break. They take them sitting on their back porch after the kids are asleep. Telehealth allows the patient to dictate the terms of their environment, rather than forcing them to adapt to a clinic's waiting room schedule.
It turns an insurmountable logistical mountain into a manageable, flexible appointment. Okay, so geography and time are huge barriers, but they aren't the final hurdles. Even if you can log on from the quiet of your parked car, we still have to tackle who you are talking to and whether you can actually afford to talk to them.
Connection and cost. You can build a logistical bridge with telehealth, but if the toll to cross that bridge is too expensive, or if the clinician on the other side doesn't understand the nuance of your life, the bridge is functionally useless.
Let's break down the team CHC has put together to solve the connection piece. The source notes they have a team of over 15 licensed therapists, and they list a mix of specific credentials, LCSWs, LPCs, and LMFTs. They offer individual couples, family, and teen therapy for ages 13 and up, alongside life coaching.
Listing those specific credentials, licensed clinical social workers, licensed professional counselors, and licensed marriage and family therapists is important because it tells us about the technical depth of the practice.
They aren't just random letters.
No, those aren't just random acronyms. They represent entirely different clinical lenses for viewing a patient's problem.
Let's actually give the listener a quick breakdown of what those mean in practice. If I'm coming in with an issue, how does an LMFT look at it differently than an LPC?
Well, let's use our earlier profile, the professional failing at home. An LPC, a professional counselor, might look at that individual's internal cognitive distortions. How are they managing stress? What are their personal coping mechanisms? But an LMFT, a marriage and family therapist, views the patient not just as an individual, but as a node in a larger family system. They are looking at the dynamic between the spouses, the communication patterns, how the work stress is structurally impacting the household equilibrium.
Oh, that makes sense. And what about the LCSW, the clinical social worker?
The LCSW brings a macro perspective. They are trained to look at environmental, systemic, and societal impacts on the individual. They ask how your community, your workplace culture, or your economic realities are contributing to your mental state.
So it's a much broader view.
Exactly. Having all three of these disciplines under one virtual roof means that practice can tailor the clinical approach to the exact shape of the patient's problem.
And the source specifically highlights that this multidisciplinary team is also diverse and culturally competent. They specialize in a huge range of the human experience: anxiety, depression, trauma, PTSD, grief, relationships, and stress.
Cultural competence is arguably the most critical component of the modern therapeutic alliance. It is the dividing line between a patient feeling clinically analyzed and a patient feeling deeply, inherently understood.
I have to challenge that a bit just to make sure we are really explaining the mechanics here. Let's say I'm a therapist with a PhD from a top-tier university. Shouldn't my decade of clinical training be enough to treat, say, a 13-year-old teen or a family dealing with grief, regardless of our cultural differences?
You would think so, but
Why does cultural competence actually change the clinical outcome? Isn't the brain just the brain?
think of it like trying to run a highly complex software program on the wrong operating system. It might eventually work, but the system is going to lag, freeze, and waste an incredible amount of processing power just trying to translate the code.
Okay, I like that analogy.
In therapy, that processing power is the patient's emotional energy. If you are sitting across from a therapist who does not share or fundamentally understand your cultural background, your community norms, or the systemic realities you face every day, you spend the first half of your session just translating your existence.
You're essentially acting as a tour guide for your own life.
Exactly. You have to explain why a certain family expectation is a non-negotiable obligation in your culture, or why a specific microaggression carries heavy historical weight. That translation process is exhausting.
You can imagine.
And remember, we are talking about everyday people who are already emotionally depleted. Culturally competent care removes that translation burden. When the therapist already gets it, the patient bypasses the educational phase and dives straight into the actual necessary healing. The trust forms faster, and the clinical outcomes improve dramatically.
So CHC shatters the geographic barrier with telehealth, and they address the connection barrier with a diverse, multidisciplinary, culturally competent team of over 15 experts. That leaves the final and often most intimidating barrier, the cost.
Oh, the financial reality of mental health care in this country is notoriously difficult.
Yeah.
Historically, therapy has been walled off as a concierge, out-of-network luxury good rather than accessible preventative routine care.
But look at the financial realities provided in the source for this specific practice. For patients on Medicaid, coping and healing counseling offers a $0 copay. $0.
Wow.
And for those with commercial insurance, they specifically list Aetna, Cigna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, and Humana. The copay is between $10 and $40 per session.
That changes the entire calculus for a working-class family. When therapy is an out-of-network expense, you might be looking at $150 to $200 out of pocket per week.
Which is just not sustainable.
No, it forces a family to weigh their mental health against their grocery bill. By structurally designing the practice to accept Medicaid and major commercial carriers and keeping copays between $0 and $40, it is a radical democratization of access.
So what does this all mean when we put the pieces together?
It means the standard excuses have been systematically engineered out of the equation. By pairing a highly qualified, culturally competent team with telehealth accessibility and $0 to $40 copays, a practice like CHC takes the gym for your mind concept and actually makes the membership viable for the general public.
Yeah.
You are looking at an operational system designed specifically to catch people before they are in crisis.
It's preventative maintenance, fully realized in the real world.
Exactly. It allows the impatient parent to address their frustration before it does permanent damage to their relationship with their children. It allows the high-performing professional to recalibrate their boundaries before they burn out completely and lose their career or their marriage.
So vital.
It treats the human condition as something worthy of care, regardless of how severe the symptoms appear on the surface.
Which brings us full circle. As we wrap up this deep dive, let's recap the journey we've been on with these sources. We started by completely shattering the dangerous myth that you need to be in a catastrophic, red alert crisis to seek help. We realized that waiting for a mental breakdown is as foolish as waiting for your car's engine to explode before checking the oil.
We examine the everyday profiles, the exhausted parent, the numb individual, the compartmentalized professional, and recognize that appearing fine is often just a very well-maintained mask for quiet suffering.
And then we moved from theory to practice, looking at the tangible blueprint of Elias Joseph's CHC model in Georgia. We saw how combining 100% telehealth across 159 counties, deploying a diverse and culturally competent team using various clinical lenses, and utilizing a low-cost insurance model actually makes mental maintenance a reality.
It systematically removes the friction of geography, the exhaustion of cultural disconnect, and the barrier of financial strain.
For you listening, if you are in Georgia, or if you have a loved one in Georgia who might need to start their own mental maintenance, we want to make sure you have the exact, actionable contact information from our sources today. You can reach Coping and Healing Counseling at 404-832-0102. That's 404-832-0102. You can also visit them online at cheattherapy.com or email them directly at support@cheattherapy.com.
It is genuinely encouraging to see a practice that aligns its operational model so perfectly with the complex lived needs of everyday people.
It really is. It takes the theory of accessible mental health and puts it into practice. And it leaves us with something incredibly important to think about as we sign off.
Yes, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final question to mull over. The source material powerfully states that you don't need to be in crisis to get support, you just need to be human. If you look closely at your own life right now, not looking for a fractured bone, not looking through the lens of a catastrophic emergency, but just through the lens of being a human being navigating the friction of daily life, where's the place you are currently pretending to be fine?
Stop waiting for the engine to catch fire. Take care of yourself.